I was 22 when I first decided it was time to tie my life to someone forever. She was my classmate, lively, smiling, and, as I thought then, the one with whom I wanted to build a family. We didn't have much money, like most people our age. We had both moved to the city from other places, trying to build our lives from scratch. Back then it felt like love would fix everything. My family didn't accept her right away, especially my mother. She thought my wife was too sharp, sometimes even rude. But I believed they would get along with time. Instead, from the very beginning, there was a spark between them that turned into conflicts. Every time I tried to step in, I only made things worse. My mother would say I wasn't on her side, and my wife would feel hurt that I wasn't supporting her enough. I found myself caught between two fires, and that was only the beginning. At first, everything seemed fairly normal. We rented a small apartment, tried to save money. When our daughter was born, I was on cloud 9. I worked from morning till night, then took side jobs at night so we could pay the bills and save at least a little. Sometimes I came home so late that I missed seeing my daughter go to bed, but on weekends I tried to spend time with her so my wife could rest. She worked hard too. Cleaning, cooking, caring for the child, all of it rested on her shoulders. Sometimes she complained about how hard it was, but back then I was too tired to help. We were both giving everything we had, and maybe that's why we started to grow tired of each other. A year after our daughter was born, we decided it was time to stop renting and buy a house. It seemed like the logical next step. We found an agency that offered us a great deal. Everything looked perfect until we learned it was a scam. We never got the house, and our money just disappeared. That blow was a serious one. My wife became even more irritable, and I didn't know how to fix the situation. Amid all of this, she began to suspect me. She said I was hiding money, that I was spending it on something I wasn't telling her about. One day, she went to a fortune teller, and as it turned out later, the woman told her I had a mistress. That conversation turned into a fight. She screamed. I tried to explain how absurd it all was, but it didn't stop her. In the end, she demanded that I leave. For 2 months, we lived apart. At first, I tried to win her back, convinced her it was all a misunderstanding, that we needed to stay together for the sake of our child. But at some point, I just got tired. I felt like I was beating my head against a wall, and that's when she herself suggested we talk. We met, discussed everything, and decided to give it another try. I moved back home, but it wasn't the same anymore. After our reconciliation, we tried to live like a normal family. I went back to my side jobs to improve our financial situation. We decided to try buying a house again. This time, everything worked out, but the debt grew, and I knew I had to work even harder. I found a new, higher-paying job, and it felt like salvation. But along with it came more pressure. Besides my main job, I kept taking on additional projects. Money started coming in, but there was less and less time for my family. I came home feeling drained. My wife often said that I spent more time at work than with her and our daughter. Deep down, I knew it was true, but there was no other way. My wife also went back to work. Now neither of us had time for conversation. Our talks boiled down to household logistics. Who would pick up our daughter from kindergarten? What needed to be bought? Where the next paycheck would go? I could see it annoyed her, but I didn't know what to do about it. When I tried to show affection, hug her, talk, suggest going out, she either brushed me off or got outright annoyed. "What's with you? Are you sick?" Comments like that killed any desire I had. I stopped trying. If she didn't need it, why keep going? We both drifted further apart. Rare moments of intimacy felt like a formality. I could sense that she didn't want me anymore, but instead of talking about it, I threw myself into work. Orders, projects, extra income, these filled my time, and I hoped the money would solve at least some of our problems. Finally, we decided to renovate the new house. It wasn't easy. Every day we discussed expenses, picked materials, argued over wall colors and furniture, but there was something unifying in it. For a while, I felt like we were a team again. We laughed, argued, went shopping together, It seemed like something was coming back between us. But the renovation ended, and with it disappeared the warmth that had briefly returned to our relationship. The demands and discontent came back. She wanted better living conditions, vacations, and trips. I worked to provide all of that, but her expectations always seemed to be higher than what I could give. I gave it everything I had, but it still wasn't enough. At some point, she started saying that I didn't know how to live, that others had it better. Other husbands were more attentive, other families were happier. More and more often I wondered, why am I doing this? What am I working myself to exhaustion for if I'm still a bad husband? I felt cornered. We lived under one roof, but we were strangers to each other. I thought everything would get better if I could just earn more. Maybe then she would finally be happy. By that point, I was living like a machine. Work, projects, bills, and more work. My wife voiced her dissatisfaction more and more, complaining that I was never home. She felt I was giving more of my time to work than to my family. I tried to explain that we just needed to hold on a little longer, that I'd finish one big project, and then we'd have enough money to live peacefully, without debt. 3 more months and everything will change, I told her. But she was tired of waiting. Her irritation only grew, and I sank deeper into my concerns. One evening, coming home from work, I felt a sudden weakness. My legs seemed to stop obeying me. The next morning, I couldn't get out of bed. My head was spinning, and the left side of my body felt numb. They took me to the hospital. The diagnosis sounded like a death sentence, a stroke at 30 years old. At first, I couldn't fully grasp what had happened. The doctors told me recovery would take years, and they offered no guarantees. I could barely walk, often lost my balance. My whole body hurt, and my head felt empty, ringing with silence. My mother came immediately and spent every day and night with me. She fed me, helped me move, stayed by my side every moment. My wife came too, but never for long, an hour, maybe 2. She said she was tied up with work, the house, and our child. I tried to justify her. I thought, she can't drop everything. She has a life to live too. But deep down, I could feel her drifting further away. A few weeks later, they moved me home. My wife stayed with me for just 3 days before returning to her routines. I tried to get up on my own, but I fell often. Vomiting, weakness, a constant sense of helplessness. I felt like a stranger in my own body. Through it all, my mother remained by my side. She never said a bad word about my wife, but her gaze said more than words ever could. I suggested to my wife that we go to a rehabilitation center. The doctor said it would speed up my recovery and give me a chance to return to a normal life sooner. She waved it off. "We'll go to the sea. You can rest and recover. The child needs a change of scenery too." I tried to explain that I needed treatment, not rest, but she insisted. In the end, she went to the sea with our daughter and her mother, while I went to stay with my parents. That decision seemed to mark the final distance between us. While I was at my parents' house, I had another episode. It wasn't as severe as the first stroke, but it was enough to make me realize just how fragile I had become. I was terrified of being alone, but I couldn't ask her to come back. It was clear she wasn't ready to carry this burden with me. When she returned from the trip, everything fell into place. She told me, almost right away, that she didn't love me anymore. It felt like a knife to the heart. I wasn't surprised, but hearing it from her still cut deep. I begged her to think it over, not to make decisions out of emotion. She agreed, but I could already see in her eyes that she wasn't really there anymore. This was the end, though I refused to believe it. After she said she no longer loved me, I desperately tried to save our marriage. I convinced myself it was just a crisis, that in time she'd realize I was still the man who had always been by her side. I did everything I could. I showed attention, avoided arguments, and let her have the last word in everything. But her coldness only grew. Now she hardly spoke to me, and when she did, her words were sharp, as if she'd long since made up her mind. Not long after, I noticed she was spending more time on her phone. Her smile while texting left me restless. I tried to reassure myself. Maybe it's just friends or work colleagues. But my doubts grew. One evening, when she left her phone unattended, I couldn't resist. I knew it was wrong, but I needed to know the truth. What I saw shattered me. She was messaging a friend she'd known for a long time. In her message, she admitted she had feelings for him, that she had always thought he was special. He responded that he respected her too much to ruin her family. The conversation had happened recently, and I realized it wasn't the only one. In another chat, she wrote to a man she'd known before we met. She told him he was the love of her life and that I had been a mistake. Those words burned through me. I couldn't hold it in. When she came home, I confronted her with everything I'd learned. It turned into a fight where somehow I was the one to blame. She accused me of ignoring her feelings for too long, of not giving her what she needed. She screamed that I had destroyed our marriage, that I'd been a shadow of a husband for years. I had no choice but to leave. I packed my things and walked out. She said I was abandoning her and our daughter, though I left everything to them. The house, the accounts, the car. I only cared that my daughter had everything she needed. I rented a small apartment and began living alone. But even after I left, her words haunted me. She told everyone I was selfish, that I had only ever lived for myself. Her mother backed her up, saying I'd freeloaded off them for years, though it had been me, my work, and my sacrifices that paid for their lives. These accusations drove me insane. I knew I hadn't been perfect, but I'd given everything I had to that family. I worked myself into the ground, and in return, I was told I was a mistake. She quickly found a replacement. A few months later, I learned she had a new man. She met him at a bar where she'd become a frequent guest. Her life seemed to bloom. New friends, trips, smiles, and carefree joy. She said he was the kind of man a husband should be. Attentive, gentle, fun. And I was left behind, stuck with my pain and my mistakes. Living alone turned out to be harder than I'd imagined. At first, there was a strange euphoria from the quiet and freedom, from not being criticized for doing everything wrong. But soon, the emptiness crept in. All my days blurred into one. Mornings were for work, and evenings were spent trying to distract myself, though most of the time I just sat in my empty apartment, replaying everything that had happened. I tried to maintain a connection with my daughter. We saw each other on weekends. I would pick her up from the house and spend as much time with her as I could. She was still too young to understand what was happening. Sometimes she would ask why I didn't live with her mom anymore, and I wouldn't know what to say. "That's just how it turned out," I'd tell her, trying not to let her see how much it hurt. My work became the only thing that distracted me from thoughts of the past. I threw myself into it completely, sometimes forgetting to eat. But at night, the depression came back stronger than ever. I would replay every accusation she had thrown at me. "You were selfish. You never appreciated me. You weren't what I needed." I tried to figure out where exactly I had gone wrong. Was it possible that everything I had done, all my sacrifices for the family, truly meant nothing? Her new life was constantly being thrown in my face through mutual friends and social media. She had become someone entirely different. The withdrawn and irritable woman I had lived with for years had turned into the life of the party. Photos of her in bars, at new parties, surrounded by a new group of friends. All of it felt unreal to me. It was as if she had shed all her former worries and started life anew. Watching it unfold filled me with bitterness. Her new man became her ideal. She made no secret of the fact that he gave her the care and tenderness I supposedly never did. She told everyone how happy she was now, how easy and joyful her life had become. Meanwhile, I remained in the shadow of her new life, a reminder of what hadn't worked out. Several months had passed since our separation, but I couldn't fully let her go. Despite all the pain, I still felt something for her. It was like an addiction. I knew she was hurting me, yet I kept reaching for her in my thoughts. Sometimes I'd wonder if maybe, if I'd been different, if I'd done something else, things could have turned out differently. But deep down, I knew those thoughts were useless. She had already chosen her path, and I was no longer part of it. A year passed since our breakup. Time had dulled the pain a little, but the scars remained. I managed to recover somewhat physically, though the effects of the stroke were still there. I learned to live with it, but it wasn't a full life. Periodically, the depression would return, especially when I thought about how things might have been different. I spent so much time picking apart my past, trying to pinpoint where I had gone wrong. Her life, meanwhile, seemed to be on the rise. She changed her wardrobe, made new friends, and started traveling frequently. Her new man was by her side everywhere. Parties, art exhibitions, restaurants. She had become the person she had never been with me. Light-hearted, open, almost carefree. Sometimes I wondered if maybe she had always been that way but couldn't show it with me. But those thoughts never lasted long. I'd remember her words, her accusations, and realize that it was simply easier for her to live without me. She often accused me of ruining her life. She said all the time we had spent together had been wasted. At the same time, she claimed I never appreciated her. It felt like a paradox. I had worked myself to exhaustion so we could have everything, yet she thought I wasn't doing it for her. She only saw what was missing and never noticed what she already had. Those accusations left a void inside me that I couldn't fill. One day, we met to discuss matters regarding our daughter. She looked happy, almost radiant. She spoke with a smile, as if nothing had ever happened between us. I looked at her and tried to understand when she had become such a stranger. Her new friends, her new man, her new life, all of it had nothing to do with me anymore. I was just a part of her past, and she didn't hide the fact that she wanted to forget that past as quickly as possible. My daughter became the one bright spot in all of this darkness. I tried to be a good father to her, even though I didn't see her as often as I wished. When we spent time together, I felt that I could still be needed. Her laughter, her smile reminded me of what I was fighting for. I no longer tried to mend things with her mother. I realized it was pointless. She had made her choice, and I no longer wanted to fight to stay with someone who didn't value me. Instead, I began to focus on myself. Work, physical rehabilitation, small gatherings with friends. This became my new reality. Sometimes I still found myself clinging to the past. Those moments were rare but painful. I'd ask myself, what if I could go back and change everything? But every time I came to the same conclusion. I gave everything I could, and it wasn't enough. She wasn't ready to accept me as I was, and I couldn't give her what she wanted. Our paths had diverged, and it had been inevitable. Now, I'm still fighting loneliness, memories, and guilt. But at the same time, I'm learning. I'm learning to appreciate what I still have, and to rebuild my life without looking back. I no longer blame her for leaving. Maybe she simply wasn't the person who could walk through all those challenges with me. And maybe I wasn't the one who could make her happy. Life goes on. It will be different, difficult, and full of struggles. But I'm still here, and that's what matters. Over time, the pain began to dull, and I started to see things differently. My ex-wife and her new life no longer filled me with bitterness. She had made her choice, and I realized it was time for me to move on too. I continued to see my daughter and tried to be a steady presence in her life. She was growing up, and I could see in her eyes that she was happy, despite all the changes in our family. That gave me strength. Work became stable, my health improved, and I was no longer afraid to look toward the future. One day, as I stopped by a cafe to grab a coffee before work, something happened that would change my life. Sitting at the table next to me was a woman, deeply absorbed in a book. Her face looked calm and focused, and I couldn't help but glance at her. There was something striking about the way she smiled when she turned the pages, a kind of genuine, unguarded joy I hadn't seen in years. When she looked up and caught me watching her, I felt a wave of embarrassment, but instead of turning away, she smiled at me. We started talking. It was unexpectedly easy, as though I'd known her for years. Her name was Kate, and she turned out to be someone who knew how to listen and understand. We talked about everything: books, work, life. I even shared a little about my past, and her response was warm and understanding. There was no pity in her eyes, no judgment, only genuine interest and empathy. We began to see each other more often. Short walks, long conversations, laughter. I couldn't believe I was starting to feel alive again. Kate accepted me for who I was, with all my flaws, my scars, and my history. She didn't need me to be anyone else. She just wanted to be there. Kate met my daughter, and they hit it off almost immediately. For the first time in a long while, I saw my daughter laugh, not just with me, but with someone else who was willing to become a part of our little family. Kate never tried to replace her mother, but she cared for her in a way that was both gentle and natural. It was beautiful to witness. Over time, I realized that I was ready to open my heart again. Not to forget the past, but to begin something new. Kate and I started making plans, small things like a trip to the countryside, cooking dinner together, or spending a day off with my daughter. But in those small moments, I found everything I had been missing for so long. Happiness, simple and real. I proposed to her a year after we first met. It was a warm autumn evening, and we were sitting on the porch of her house talking about our plans for the coming months. I looked at her and said, "You've changed my life. You've made it better, and I want to spend all I have with you." She smiled and replied, "I will." It was so simple, so natural, that I couldn't have imagined any other answer. Now I realize that all the trials I went through led me to this moment. They taught me to appreciate life and the people who truly want to be part of it. With Kate, I found not just a partner but a friend, someone who understands me in a way no one else ever has. She became the light that pulled me out of the darkness. I no longer look back. My past is part of me, but it no longer defines my present. I have a daughter, a woman who gave me a new beginning, and a life I'm building from the ground up. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like everything is going to be okay.